tonight's agenda? Hearing none and seeing none, we'll move on. A motion would be in order to adopt tonight's agenda.
To adopt the agenda with the addition of 9A.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, motion carries. Item number 7 is our truth and taxation public hearing. Do we have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
And waive the reading?
And waive the reading, yes.
All right, second.
Okay, and we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed, the motion carries on a 5-0 vote. We have a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This evening, we do have for your consideration the 2019.
Okay, we need to hear higher audio for.
I can try moving it a little closer. Is that any better?
Yeah, that might work. I don't know. Either that, telling Brian to turn it up.
How about now? Is that any?
No.
Okay. Okay,
Just talk
I can do
louder.
that. That's not a problem. All right. So this evening, we'll be discussing the proposed 2019 budget, including all of the various constituent funds, and then we will close the presentation with a review of the 2019 property tax levy as proposed and certified by the council, and then we will briefly discuss next steps. So as we've done in the past, we usually begin our budget discussions with just an overview of the economic conditions and expectations for the next year. We do know from the state of Minnesota that the region continues to experience an improving and growing economy. And recently, the Federal Reserve did raise its target federal funds rate to a target of 2 to 2.25%. And then just recently, this last Thursday, the state did release its most recent budget projections and is predicting a surplus of just over $1.5 billion. But that budget prediction also included some slowing economic development numbers beginning in 2019 and until 2023. And then as we know from the news, there are some growing trade policy disputes with some major international trading partners, and that has created some long-term uncertainty in our budget predictions. Just generally, I'd just like to touch on some assumptions that are woven throughout the entire budget. We do use a conservative revenue and expenditure model. This is designed to...
There we go.
Oh, now I gotta get a little quieter.
No.
This is designed to prevent any unanticipated budget shortfalls. We are assuming a single salary step increase for all eligible employees, and at this point in time, the 2019 budget includes a 3% cost of living adjustment. Annually, as part of the budget process, we do reallocate our current resources based on our needs, and it's always important to note that any budget is consistent with the previously approved actions of the City Council, so projects, plans, studies, things of that nature. It does currently support the current complement of employees, and it is structurally balanced, meaning that our ongoing revenues meet with our ongoing expenditures. A couple things that are not included in the proposed 2019 budget: there is no adjustment to address any wage disparities between the union and non-union staff, and there are no expenditures planned for the pending park system master plan. And just discussing the 2019 general fund budget and the revenue forecast, we are anticipating another strong year of economic development and community development. At this point in time, we have an additional added valuation year-to-date for the community of just over $89 million, so we are on pace for another $100 million year, and the budget assumptions do reflect that trend. We are anticipating some additional revenue in building inspection permits. Other financing sources, the council has set the long-term goal of reducing the use of the closed bond fund, and we'll talk about the property tax assumptions later in the presentation, but as a part of the 6.5% increase in the property tax levy, we have eliminated the use of the closed bond fund as a financing source for the general fund. So that has been drawn down over many years, and the 2019 budget reflects the first year in a while where we haven't made use of that fund to support ongoing operations. And then we are also anticipating stable local government aid. It's important to note, though, that the change in the property tax levy has also allowed the city to maintain a stable use of local government aid for the general fund. As you've seen this chart in the past, we have seen an increasing use, and because of the change in the property tax levy, we are leveling that off over time. So generally, this budget is reducing reliance on one-time money through the closed bond fund and local government aid. And this is a summary of the 2019 general fund for the revenue forecast. As you can see below, and others transferred, that negative 35% does reflect that reduction in the use of the closed bond fund. And the miscellaneous increase of about 17% is in part due to anticipated increase in investment earnings as the federal funds rate increases and the city sees a greater return on its investment portfolio. And as you can see here, this is an overview of the 5-year trend of general fund revenues from the 2015 budget to the current level. It's worth noting that over the last 5 years, revenues have increased about 2.96% per year on average. Moving into expenditures, it's important to stress that the personnel budget makes up the lion's share of general fund expenditures, about 77%. And because of some of those personnel changes that were outlined in the general assumptions slide, we are anticipating about $375,000 of personnel increases this year. And that does again include those single salary step, the increase in the COLA, and a 7% increase in health insurance and workers' compensation. We did see a one-time reduction of $60,000 for the election. As the council is aware, that amount tends to ebb and flow, whether or not there's an election in that current year. So major changes to the general fund in terms of expenditures, as we've talked over some time now, the Civic Campus. We are anticipating about $235,000 in additional utility service charges and about another $82,000 for custodial work here at City Hall and Public Works. That's mainly an additional employee to help service the new facilities. Additionally, this budget also includes a 2.5% increase, or about $91,000 in non-personnel expenditures to account for inflation. And at this point in time, it does include monies for the continued maintenance of the municipal center pending its conveyance to a third party. And as the council is aware, you are in the process of effectuating that deal. So before the budget is adopted, some of those numbers may change. And again, here you see just an overview of the general fund expenditure forecast. As you can see in finance, there's a 12% increase that reflects a shift from the capital budget, mainly to handle an Office 365 migration, and then below there, another 12% increase in Public Works, and that reflects the increased costs that were mentioned on the previous slide. Much like the revenue slide, this reflects the increase in expenditures over time, and over the 5-year period from the budget beginning in 2015, expenditures have increased about 2.57% on average. Given the revenue and expenditure outlook as part of the proposed 2019 budget, the city is anticipating a stable general fund balance, and as you can see outlined in this slide, the city is currently maintaining a fund balance that is above its 50% working capital, and those two arrowed boxes on the right reflect the amount of money the city could spend if it were to draw down to those individual levels. So $880,000 and change down to the 50% level, and then all the way down about $3.5 million down to the 35% level. So the general fund is in a very strong position. As you can note, though, the council in the past has been in the position of trying to save fund balance, and the strategies to date have paid off through conservative budgeting. Moving into the capital plan, it's just important to note that the city currently maintains 5 capital project funds for buildings, streets, parks, information technology, and capital equipment. For next year, in building capital improvements, we are anticipating about $250,000 of expenditures for a public safety and public works storage facility. And at this point in time, we would propose to use mostly fund balance to finance the cost of that facility. In the street improvement fund, we have about $480,000 for Westmore Lake. Excuse me, there's a typo there on Moore. And $910,000 for street rehabilitation. And we are using about $733,000 of fund balance. For the Parks Capital Improvement Plan, we do have a handful of large projects anticipated, $300,000 for the Springbrook Nature Center Park Pavilion. As the council is aware, you did receive a grant from the DNR, and so those grant monies will be spent next year as part of that project. And then between Civic Campus and Lock Point Park improvements, we are anticipating about a total of $375,000 in expenditures. And again, we're drawing down fund balance to the tune of about $456,000. In the IT fund, we have two major projects, $110,000 to replace the city servers. They are at the end of their useful life. This is about an expenditure that comes up about once every 5 years. And additionally, we're anticipating about $122,000 in technology replacements. These monies are used to handle all of the various personal computers, printers, et cetera, things that have to be replaced on a regular basis at the city. And again, we're planning on spending about $168,000 in fund balance. And in the last capital equipment fund, two major expenditures for next year, about $127,000 on police vehicles and $135,000 for SCBAs, or the breathing apparatuses that the firefighters use. And it's important to note that much like past years, city staff have continued to defer the purchase of certain capital expenditures. This is one of the funds that we have some additional considerations for and figure out how to fund long-term capital expenditures. But again, much like previous years, we are planning on spending down about $117,000 in fund balance to support capital equipment needs. This is one of the more interesting slides that will be in the presentation. As you can see, in actual 17 and budget for 18, the city, in terms of capital expenditures, spent north of $20 million. That's mainly for the civic campus. And you can see after those 2 years in 19, our capital investment program spending levels return to more historic trends down near the $5 million. Still, though, it's important to stress that the city still will be spending, again, about $5 million per year. It just looks to be less because of the outliers that in the expenditure that this building constituted. So consistent with that spending, you can see the capital investment fund balances are anticipated to decline from projected 18 to projected 19. It's important to note that several projects were delayed as a part of the 2018 budget, including a street project and also some park improvement projects. So even though the decline seems to be especially precipitous this year, it has to do with the fact that we are essentially accomplishing 2 years of capital projects in a single year. The one thing I would also stress is this trend over time is not unusual for capital funds. You normally see the cyclical nature where you have periods of spending followed by periods of saving and then moving on in that nature. So we're in a spending period, and as we've discussed with the council and then among staff, we do have plans to improve those fund balances over time. The next section of the budget are the special revenue funds. We currently maintain 4 of them for cable television, solid waste abatement, police activity, and the Nature Center. Right now in marketing and communications, or cable television, we are reallocating about $89,000 of personnel expenditures to maintain the fund's solvency, and we're anticipating about a 2.9% increase in franchise fees. This is based on a historic average of the franchise fees over time. In solid waste abatement or recycling, we're anticipating just over a $36,000 increase in recycling costs, and as the council has discussed at some length in past conference meeting, this mainly has to do with the value of recyclable materials on the commodities market, and so the budget has been modified to reflect those increased costs. And then additionally, at your last council meeting, you did approve a 10% increase in the solid waste abatement fees to accommodate that increase in expenditures. In the police activity fund, we're anticipating about a $274,000 increase. The city is planning for the next 3 years to administer the Towards Zero Death Grant for the entire Anoka County area. Individual cities take turns in 3-year periods administering the grant on behalf of the other agencies, and so it's Fridley's turn. And so the police activity fund reflects that increase both in revenue from the grant and then expenditures and payments to other agencies. And in the Springbrook Nature Center fund, we are anticipating about a $50,000 increase in a donation from the Nature Center Foundation to support that new park pavilion as part of monies to match the grant received from the DNR. And at present, the proposed budget does estimate an operating surplus for Springbrook Nature Center of just over $24,000. It's important to note that any operating surpluses are allowed to fall to fund balance and then are used in future years to pay for certain capital expenditures, maintenance, repairs, things of that nature. So this slide represents just a history of the special revenue funds revenue summary over time. And the one thing to note is that the police activity fund did begin in 2016. That's why you don't see any revenues in 2015. And then similarly, the expenditures, most of which are attributed to that police activity fund with that additional $275,000 for the Towards Zero Death Grant. The enterprise funds, the city currently maintains 4, one for the water utility, sanitary sewer utility, the stormwater utility, and also the municipal liquor stores. For the water utility, at this point in time, we are planning about $3.8 million of expenditures next year for the Lock Park Treatment Plant. And the council, it's worth noting, has already approved the enterprise utility fund rates at your previous meeting. So that authorization is included as a part of this proposed 2019 budget. And the one thing to stress in the water fund is that the water consumption has continued to decline, so we are seeing about a 22% decrease since 2012, despite an increase in the city's population of 3% over that same period. And it's important to note that in 2019, we are anticipating issuing about $3.8 million in water utility revenue bonds to support the cost of the Lock Park Treatment Plant project. In the sanitary sewer utility fund, we are anticipating 2 major projects, collection system lining and also lift station rehabilitation. This fund also includes the anticipated 4.4% increase in volume rates. It's important to note, though, that there's been no increase in the base fees for both the residential and multifamily for 3 units or less. And at this point in time, much like the water utility fund, we are anticipating issuing just over $1 million in sanitary sewer bonds to support certain projects. And the one thing that is always important to stress when we're talking about the sanitary sewer utility fund is that Metropolitan Council environmental service charges make up about 70% of the costs of this fund. And we have been informed by Met Council that in 2019, those fees will be going up 9.2%. For the stormwater utility, 2 larger projects. We have some stormwater system upgrades and also the Oak Glen Creek Erosion Control Project. As part of the authorization for the stormwater utility, there is a 3.5% increase in that utility rate. And at this point in time, this fund does not anticipate any borrowing, and in fact, we are estimating a surplus for 2019 of about $325,000. It's important to stress that any surplus is allowed to fall to fund balance, and then those monies are used in the future to finance larger projects and allows the city to avoid borrowing and borrowing costs. The municipal liquor fund, at this point in time, we are anticipating about an $18,000 increase in the rewards program. It's been very successful, and a lot of folks are taking advantage of it, so we have a corresponding increase. And then we are having about a $276,000 increase in the cost of goods sold. Certain items, such as beer, are going up in cost, and so this budget reflects that as well. And the 2019 budget is estimating for the first time ever that the municipal liquor stores will exceed $6 million in sales. Beyond the strength of those sales, this proposed budget does plan to continue the transfer of about $388,000 to the Park Improvement and Capital Equipment Fund, and then also about $51,000 to the general fund as an administrative charge. The one thing to keep in mind for next year is that the profitability of the municipal liquor store may be impacted by a new regional competitor that we're planning for at the end of 19 and beginning of 2020. But in the interim, sales at both stores are anticipated to increase about 6.3%. So much like the previous budget sections, here's the revenue summary for the various enterprise funds. And then, of course, the expenditure summaries. The expenditure summaries are a little higher because the city has been using borrowing to finance some of the projects, and these expenditure funds reflect those amounts. So, moving into the property tax levy, it's just important to stress that the city must certify a proposed and final property tax levy pursuant to state law, and that the final property tax levy may not exceed the proposed property tax levy except for certain situations that are outlined in state law. Last year, the council opted for a 4.86% increase in the overall levy, and as a part of your discussion about the proposed 2019 property tax levy, the council did set the general levies at 6.5%, which leads to the overall levy to be increased on the proposed side about 4.64%. The table included here represents the 4 parts of the city's property tax levy. We have one for the general fund, IT capital projects fund, the nature center, and then debt service. And as you can see below, all of those add up to a 4.64% increase in the property tax levy. And the one thing to stress is that the general fund property tax levy at this point in time makes up about 68% of all operating revenues. This table represents, going back to 2010, the various changes in the property tax levy over time. You can see beginning in 2017, in the red, the additional debt service for the Civic Campus project. And then additionally, over that entire time period since 2009, the property tax levy has averaged an increase of about 4.6%. For 2019, we were planning just over $5.6 million in external revenues and about $17.4 million in expenditures. As a result, the net city cost is about $11.78 million, meaning the amount that needs to be made up by property tax or fund balances. At this point in time, as you can see in the table below, a 6.5% increase in the property tax levy would provide for a balanced general fund budget. And then just as reference, you can see what the effect on the general fund budget would be for 5%, 3%, 0%, and negative 3%. So just as reference, if the council, were to reduce the levy by 3%, the deficit to the general fund budget would be just over $1 million, or about 6% of the overall operating costs. As part of the property tax levy and the property tax levy calculations, it's important to review what the estimated market values for residential homesteads are anticipated to be as a part of the 2019 budget. And so you can see below, highlighted in bold, in 2018, the estimated market value of a median valued home was about $186,500, and then for 2019, about $202,900, or an 8.8% increase. As we talked about at conference meetings, you can see the average residential homesteads in the parentheticals there listed at the current MLS are currently above what it is we're seeing in estimated market value, and this generally suggests that home values are still trending upward. So we could anticipate same or similar changes for next year. So using that property tax levy and the estimated market values of a residential homestead, we can see that when accounting for the shift in value, the change would be about $38 per year, about 4.6%, or about $3 per month. And then it's important to stress that about 83% of that change is actually attributable to the increase in valuation. So if the value were held flat and the city were to maintain its property tax rate, the average bill would actually go down. So what's next? This is just a slide that outlines some previous steps, but you can see in bold right now we are conducting the Truth in Taxation meeting for the 2019 budget and levy. And then at this point in time, staff anticipates the council to adopt the final 19 budget, the 2019 and 2023 CIP, the proposed property tax levies, and the revised 2018 budget at your next meeting on the 17th. Assuming the council does so, city staff would then certify all of that to Anoka County by December 21st. And lastly, I would just add that at this point in time, the state does offer 2 different property tax refunds for homestead property owners. There's a regular homestead credit refund, which is a means-tested program, meaning they take into account your income, household size, et cetera, and then a special homestead credit refund, which is designed to provide property tax relief for folks that experience larger than anticipated increases in their property taxes. And to apply, any property owners can contact the Minnesota Department of Revenue. We can, of course, work with anyone that's interested in those programs and provide them with the appropriate contact information. So that's a lot of information, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have about any portion of the budget or the property tax levy.
Thank you for your report. Does the council have questions?
Mr. Mayor, all the presentation you gave tonight will be part of the minutes for the, correct?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yes, that's correct. They'll be part of the minutes. And then additionally, in anticipation for the Truth in Taxation hearing, we did post a longer, more comprehensive presentation that's already available on the city's website.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. Are there comments from people sitting in the audience that wish to address the issue about our taxes? Anybody? Come on up to the podium, sir, and state your name. What was the first name?
Larry Miskowitz.
Okay, Larry, sure.
When a light rail comes through Fridley, does that cost us anything as taxpayers? How does that work?
The light rail, or the commuter rail?
Yeah. Do we get anything out of that for using our property?
Well, you're not paying it from the local property taxation, but the Met Council gets taxes from the state, so it all segues down to us taxpayers at some form of, or level of government, but it's coming from the Metropolitan Council.
Is that a losing deal, coming through Fridley?
Well, it doesn't affect us because of to answer your question, yeah, it's not making the money to pay for it. It's in the red, and will probably be that way for quite some time until more rail lines are added on, but we don't pay anything special for that. I mean, you're not paying any more tax than somebody in another community. It's all coming from the state pot.
All right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I might add, though,
Sure.
to that, by being a rail city, other development has certainly been inspired. For example, the Sherman development that we have talked about is a development that wants to be next to the rail station, and so I think there is a nexus there.
Good point. So indirectly, we do have some benefit coming from that because of the development, which brings in another new taxpayer. That helps us all tear down ours a little bit.
Mr. Mayor and Mr. Hickok, also just the transit-oriented, I mean, so we can change things and we can have higher density and some of those things because of that also. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Well said.
So I take it you're not a big fan of the commuter rail, but yeah, it is costly. There's no,
Every time I see it go by, it's like, where are the people on?
yeah.
It's a losing deal.
Actually, I think the ridership is as much as I mean, it's filled, maybe not a lot of people from Fridley because they can make it downtown quicker and one of the spots aren't here, but my understanding, there's a significant amount of people and it does give people an opportunity to have another way to get downtown. And it's also used for the Twins when they do run special trips downtown for the Twins also, so you see that parking lot filled up more too, so.
It gets used a lot here in Fridley for the ball games. That's what I notice.
Yeah.
So. Yes, sir.
Keep on losing them.
He's got a Bears jacket on. Don Grant, I live on Rice Creek Road, walking distance from my council member's house. Thank you for the presentation. I tried to find some of this information out prior to this evening, but I was unable to because either I'm not smart enough or it's hidden on the website or I needed a stack of paper. This was, I don't know if this was designed to blow our minds. It was very full of information and you went very quickly. So after this, I would like to know where I could get more information, a detailed breakdown. I mean, is it on the website?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the detailed budget, proposed budget is not available on the website. We did just provide the summary. If you're interested in having a copy of the proposed budget, we can certainly provide that to you.
Okay, that'd be great.
Not an issue.
I had a whole bunch of notes, but most of it's not about this. Okay. The city seems to be bonding for a number of items, and I did take the tour of the building on the open house. It's very nice. I voted for it, and I hope that it does last for 50 to 100 years. We'll all be dead, but, you know, kids won't be. Is there a way to not pay all the interest on the bonds by collecting the money over time and buying things outright?
Are you talking about this particular bond for this this campus.
Well, that and
There's
other
other
thing-
bonding that does
Yeah.
take place.
Yeah. Anything that, I mean, it's always better to pay cash than pay interest. And I'm wondering what the thought is of the council. I know 50 million, you don't have that in your pocket, but,
It was by far the largest bond that the history of Fridley has had,
well, I'm sure,
yes.
yeah.
The interest is actually pretty low. It's like, what, averages to 3.1 or 3.2% over the life of the loan, but, right, still, it's a large chunk of money, and even with low, cheap interest rate, it's added money, but the only way to pay that back more quickly to eliminate interest, in my mind, is up the taxes again to
I
get.
knew you were gonna say
Oh,
that.
Well, there's a limited what you can do, so.
We could put a toll road over there, the toll gate on the train. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to, add to your comment about, is there something we can do about other bonding? So we try to minimize that bonding, so without having to raise the taxes 10% or 12%. And of course, we try to cut back on, can we delay this? Do we absolutely need it? So we try to do the bonding more often than every 2 years rather than every year, because there is a cost for doing that bonding. So for the economy of scale, we save some money there. And we have been in a spending mode, but as the presentation alluded to that, so it kind of ebb and flows. We have years that we got to save, and then years that we haven't done a lot of projects that, their useful life is expired, and so we got to do them. So sometimes it's like catch up. Then we're good for a little while, and then we got to catch up again. So it's always a weighted factor, and we have long discussions about them, and so does the staff. So we try to come to some even keel medium, I guess is what I'd say. So.
Mr. Mayor, it's also fair to say that our projects we have aging infrastructure. We're not like a Maple Grove that hasn't been around very long. So when we do a project, whether it be a street reconstruction or one of the ones that was listed up here as one of the wells, I mean, we have older infrastructure, so it does take money and a significant amount of money to work on a well. I mean, it's totally amazing to me the first time I heard how much we spend on that, but it's also giving you the very best water that we can give you, but all those projects are not simple, and they're very complex, and so it takes a fair amount of money just to do any one of those big projects. But as the mayor said, we all like, really, do we need that? And I think our staff, along with our city manager, does a very good job of, and if you've ever talked to, an example is one of our mechanics, how much they keep, your truck, but they're out there on the street, the plows, but hopefully also with our new civic campus, some of those things that we're setting outside are gonna last 20% longer. Might not help you and me at our age, but hopefully, ultimately, it'll have some of that equipment lasting 20% longer, so.
Are there any other comments that persons in the audience wish to address on the truth in taxation?
So in order, I move to close the public hearing?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? Rest assured, trying the best we can do to keep taxes down.
And I think anyone listening in the audience, if you have questions, we can surely get some answers for you too, or more detail if you want it, so.
Sir, you want to probably just privately share your email or something with our finance director so that he can send you that information? So you can just go over there to talk to him.
Does this help?
Well, the audience can't, the people in TV land can't hear you from sitting there. You have to stand at the
Okay.
mic.
Because as I look around the room, I see some familiar faces, I know a couple names, and I'm hoping that part of the $50-some million on the building included some name plaques.
Oh, well, they're coming.
They're coming. The old ones don't stick on this pretty stuff, so we're getting some new ones.
They've been ordered. It's one of the dozens of things that are probably still out there yet. Okay, we'll move on. Under old business, item number 8, the second reading of an ordinance under section 12.06 of the city charter and Minnesota state section regarding certain real estate and authorizing the conveyance thereof. This relates to the former municipal center.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you might recall, on November 26th, the council held their first reading and certainly passed the first reading of the ordinance regarding this transfer of property. This is in accordance with the city charter, chapter 12.06, and also with state statute. Tonight, you're being asked to consider the second reading of that ordinance that would convey the property to the HRA with the idea that the HRA then would negotiate on behalf of the city with the developer who is interested in building a 134-unit senior building on the former City Hall site. They hope to get that demolition done in this winter of 2019 and be ready to start construction spring of 2019. So what you're doing is you're conveying the property to the HRA to negotiate on your behalf, to sell the property, and then proceeds of that sale after expenses will come back to the city. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have this evening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hickok. Council have questions? Okay, if nothing, no comments, and a motion would be in order.
Mr. Mayor, if it's so in order, I move a second reading of an ordinance under section 12.06 of the city charter and Minnesota statute, section 465.035, regarding certain real estate and authorizing the conveyance thereof, found on page 91. Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. If there's no other discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed, the motion carries. Under old business, item number 9, a second reading of an ordinance amending Fridley City Code, chapter 104, pertaining to tree management.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll take this item. Jim Kozlucher, Public Works Director, for those that don't know me at home. The motivation for this update of Chapter 104 is passage of our Emerald Ash Borer Mitigation Plan, requirements for Tree City USA qualification, and updates in insurance and references and licensing since the last revision of this ordinance. You remember we last saw this in April of this year. It's been a while. We set it aside. We had some edits to do to the ordinance upon first reading, and quite honestly, we were waylaid with a lot of project activities until this time, so we were able to bring it back to you before the end of the year here. The goals of the update are to clarify the city's tree management program goals. And so we're expanding from pest management to resilient urban forest. We're explicitly stating the right to manage trees on land such as parks and rights-of-ways, which is a Tree City USA requirement. We're clarifying the definition of a public tree nuisance. We're shifting from specific disease that the ordinance was, I guess, established for to deal with, Dutch elm and oak wilt, to characteristics of a nuisance tree. And then we're clarifying the city's response to public tree nuisances, aligning with field diagnosis processes that are modern, notification, tree replacement, explicitly clarifying the management of right-of-way trees, removing items outside of the city's jurisdiction, such as transportation of firewood that's handled by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We're also updating licensing requirements and reference statutes that are out of date. Changes since the first reading, mainly to clarify verbiage related to pest versus disease and streamline under the phrase nuisance. So we heard the council's concern was that there were several references, pest, disease, that kind of thing, so we rolled them under the umbrella term nuisance. With that, we request council waive the second reading and adopt the ordinance amending Chapter 104, disease trees related to the tree management as shown in Attachment 1, and further adopt a summary ordinance amending chapter 104, tree management, as shown in the attachment 2. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Kozlucher. Are there any comments or questions from council?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Kozlucher, on page 94,
Yes.
there?
Yes.
104.04, number 2. I don't get that one. So if it's, is that like if a tree's in a forest and it falls and there's no one there, it's okay? When would it be okay? I mean, I'm not quite understanding that one.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Volcom, yes, you're citing an exact case. When there isn't a target, let's take, for instance, Innsbruck Nature Center or Nature Park, you know, that's a natural area. If a tree were to be structurally a problem and not be somewhere where, you know, folks, you know, are routed, you know, via trail or what have you, and that tree was allowed to fall over, then that's perfectly fine. There is no reason that the city would be mandated to deal with that necessarily. It's not considered a hazard unless there is a reasonable expectation that it were to, you know, be hazardous to someone.
But a tree in my backyard, and there's a fence in my backyard, and my tree could fall on my neighbor's fence, then that's one that's considered a nuisance, and we'd have to,
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Volcom, you've cited that correctly.
okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, seeing none, a motion would be in order.
Mr. Mayor, if it's so in order, I move a second reading of an ordinance amending Fridley City Code, Chapter 104, pertaining to tree management, found on pages 93 to 98.
Second?
And
Oops, sorry.
attachment number 2, which is an ordinance amending Fridley City Code, Chapter 104, tree management, which is a summary ordinance found on page 99.
Very good.
Now I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion with second. There's no other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed, the motion carries. Item number 9A, which was removed from consent item 2, Ms. Reynolds.
Pam Reynolds, 1241 Norton. Excuse me. I asked to have it removed because when I tried to read it on the website, there's blue, and there's purple, and there's lines out, and there's lines through blue, and there's lines through purple, and some of it is purple, and some of it's blue, and I was like totally confused. So I tried to read it, and so what I'm seeing is it's an attempt to make rental property safer by limiting the number of police calls? Is that in there?
The limiting what?
The number of police calls, the number, so like if I'm a landlord and I have somebody that, they're really bad and they're calling the police all the time, or the other neighbors are calling the police, then that's gonna go into whether or not they stay there?
No.
It becomes the landlord's problem?
I'll ask our city staff that has worked on this extensively to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What this ordinance would allow is, there is a behavioral element to the modifications in 220 that certainly would make it incumbent upon the owner of a property to assure that this isn't a nuisance, that this isn't a problem that's reoccurring where there is an issue with a tenant in a unit, and if so, there is a certain protocol that will be followed by the management to make sure that that issue is eliminated and that it doesn't become a problem for the other folks in that complex.
So then, another question I had was, it talks about a class that the owners have to take in order to, you know, certify that they understand the new language. Where is that class going to be taught? Who's going to teach it? And how is it being communicated to the rental property owners?
Mr. Hickok?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The property owners have already been contacted by the police department and already have been engaged in the modifications. They have been educated about what will change, and they will also be given an opportunity to be educated further through police presentations, and that is what this is referring to, is that they will be brought up to speed as to what the ordinance amendments mean to them and exactly how that behavioral protocol will work when an issue is identified in their complex.
In this training that Ms. Reynolds alludes to, is that also something that happens at this facility?
Yes, it can now, yes.
Okay, then I had another question. In there, it says that the property owner will adjust their leases so that people understand this is the new rules. So does that apply only to new leases, or does he have to go back and renew old leases?
You mean like make an addendum now to
Yeah.
attach to their existing lease?
Yeah,
Good point.
I'm just wondering because,
Or does it happen at renewal time?
well, that was one of those sections where there was cross out and purple
Well, I
and blue
understand
and-
that there was different colored ink used, but I disregarded the coloring. All I look for is what's underlined as new and what's crossed out as old, so that I
Well, and
can
then I
see what
thought,
the
well,
changes were.
maybe the purple had something to do with changes made after the first reading, and it made no sense.
I don't know that that's the case, but I'll ask Mr. Hickok.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The crime-free addendum is what's being referred to here. All new leases will have reference in them to the crime-free addendum. It is important to note that this modification to the code, though it calls out the crime-free addendum, it is part of state law currently, and this is merely an opportunity for owners to truly understand and to make it part of the lease so that tenants understand that they're under crime-free, this crime-free addendum, and that the purpose is to keep crime out of our rental properties.
So in answer, I don't know if he completely answered your question about when does that, so if they have to make modifications to an existing lease, do they do that now in a short period of time as an addendum to an existing lease, or do they wait until renewal time for that lease then?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, because the law protects them right now, when the lease is renewed, the crime-free addendum will be part of that
So the
new
existing
language.
lease stays the same when
Correct.
when that lease expires,
Yes.
or if they want to do a renewal, or.
So they're gonna have to get new leases printed up,
Well, I don't,
something.
But my understanding is that it's already part of state law anyway, so it's not something, granted, it might be right in their lease now, but it's something that's already been there anyway, so.
That's correct.
well,
I
in my
haven't signed
case,
a
I would
lease in
just.
years, so
I-
I don't know what they say.
In my case, I have it on as a PDF and a Word doc, and, they make changes periodically to leases. They don't stay the same over the last 20 years. I mean, there's always some changes. Or you left something out that becomes a problem after the fact, and now you gotta make a change to address that issue.
Okay, and then another question about the training. What about outstate owners or out-of-the-city owners?
Section,
Yes, Mr. Hickok?
Mr. Mayor, our speaker does point out one of the issues with owning property is that it is incumbent upon you to understand what happens locally, and it is incumbent upon you to go through what you need to go through to own property locally. And so they would need to be here and represented so that they understand what it is to own property here and what the expectations are.
Wow.
Well, the small property owners would probably have to make a visit here, or maybe they can do it online, I don't know.
Well, I was
But the
thinking,
large
is it
ones
online?
probably have
Some kind of training online.
representation here, like a manager, management, or something like that.
Right.
they actually have to, that's part of the whole rental ordinance.
What, to be in person?
No, that they have to have a local representative.
Yeah, I
So
think
it
it's,
isn't-
it's
yes.
on page 43, it talks
Right.
about appointing a designated agent residing in the
Right.
district.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's in there, so it isn't whether, so it's not.
There's actually services out there that you pay to have a designated agent.
I know.
Oh, okay.
And then my last thing was, With all of the nuisance abatement stuff with utilities, I didn't see anything in there tying the license to paying utilities.
Okay, Mr. Hickok,
Um,
want to take that one as well? Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I do believe there is a caveat in there that a new license would be linked, but
I don't think there is.
Well-
Well, I didn't see it.
Okay.
But blue, purple.
Well, even on the utilities, if they don't, if they don't pay and they get too far in arrears, it's abated and it goes to the property tax, so.
Yeah.
Right, but
But I get your point, so this is just another way to try to get,
It's part of the license, though.
It is.
yeah.
So
is.
whether it's in here or not, it's part of the license. You can't get a license unless you're up to date on your utilities.
So it should be in the original verbiage rather than the underlined?
I didn't think it was in there at all. That's why it goes to, if they're licensed yearly, and they go through the process and it goes to the county to be added to their taxes, then they did not pay their utilities before they got a new license. Well, whatever. I was just reading it, and I also was looking for the tax documents online and didn't, or the budget documents online, I didn't see them, so
Okay,
hopefully they'll be there tomorrow.
the summary will be if you need something.
Yeah, I just wanted to see the same thing he did before I came tonight, and it wasn't there anywhere.
Okay,
All right, that's it.
okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, just relative to the utility discussion here, one of the things that's important to note is that there's a minimum standard that's required for any rental unit, and they need to provide the ability for heat, for hot water, for sanitary conditions and so forth. If they're going into a licensing situation where any of that is in jeopardy, certainly that is discussed with the property owner. And I was looking to pinpoint it here, but just to know for certain that there is a minimum standard of requirement there. And our utility billing folks and our rental housing folks, not only do they work very closely together, but in this new facility, they're side by side, so that it really does give us a good handle on that. And certainly, we don't want them to get into a situation where they're already over their heads if they can't pay their utilities and they're coming in for relicensing. Certainly that is discussed. Where I can pinpoint it in the ordinance right now, I'm having difficulty, but I will tell you that it's part of the minimum standard for the housing unit itself to be able to provide those things, and they cannot be shut off, or it doesn't meet the minimum standard.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I wanted to point out that, I know we're splitting hairs, but your property tax lien attaches to your property on January 2nd. And under the law, you get to pay half of it in May and half of it October, but the lien is there, so all the utility charges are levied and they're there.
Right. So whether you can find it here in chapter 104 or elsewhere in the licensing, might it be in another chapter or different section?
It would all really fall and be protected by the minimum standard for renting a unit, and they have to be able to provide those minimum standards of hot water and so forth. And with delinquent utilities and them being shut off, that wouldn't be possible.
Okay.
I had one last thing. How much of the language that was changed can then be turned around and transferred to the renter by the lease? You know, like, it's the property owner's responsibility for snow removal, maintenance of the property, but then they turn around and they make the lease say, you're responsible, you're responsible, you're responsible. In the end, who's really, how much of this will make the owners actually responsible?
Mr. Hickok?
Mr. Mayor, frankly, the purpose of Chapter 220 and any amendments was to help clarify language and to prescribe behavioral protocol in the event that there are issues. Owners of properties oftentimes will lease based on the renters paying utilities, the renters shoveling their walkways and things like that. So Really, that's a private issue that this ordinance doesn't attempt to get into, and you probably won't find that, or caveats to the like, in 220.
So it's, what's that?
I think it is covered in 220 where it says what the
What the
property
minimums might be,
owners
but there's
would-
gonna be add-ons or whatever, as long
Right.
as it doesn't violate
Okay, I
local
just-
law
I just
or
wondered
state
if-
ordinance, state law.
Okay.
M-
thanks.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Hickok, I think one of the big things here too is a lot of it has to do with behavior. And our city staff have worked very close with a lot of our landlords and our, to talk about behavior and that someone doesn't move from one property into another property and have some of that very same behavior. And this was not made just by the police. This was a coalition of landlords along with our police department working very closely together to make something that helps them too. It ultimately helps the owner of the property because now it gives them opportunities to hold their tenants in,
I
in
guess I
check.
didn't realize there were landlords involved in the.
Oh, yes,
in
and
the
and this isn't something new. There's a fair amount of landlords that have been working with our police department for years. It's just, I think, a lot more detailed, and more of them have come on board realizing they need some help with their tenants also, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was at the first, I don't know if you were here, Pam, but it was at the first presentation where Brian and Pat Wolf talked about that, so, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, a motion would be in order.
Dolores, it's your turn.
Okay. If so in order,
It's on page 55.
55.
Big one.
All right, if so in order, I approve the second reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 220 of the Fridley City Code related to residential rental property maintenance and licensing code found on page 55.
Second.
And I think we gotta adopt the official title and summary ordinance.
Okay,
Would you be willing to add that?
I'd be willing to add that.
Okay? Is that on 55?
It's part of it.
Well,
Part
it's
of it.
19 through 55. is
It
the
is 19
section.
through 55. Okay, pages 19 to 55.
Pages
And it
19
includes the
through
summary
55,
ordinance.
including the
Right.
summary
Okay.
ordinance.
Do we have that all on, recorded?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Do we have a second?
I seconded it.
We have a second. Is there any other final discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries. This leads us under new business. Item number 10, a resolution amending resolution number 2014-54 and rescinding resolution number 2014-92.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is a pretty straightforward, good news item for you. Basically, what this talks about is that back when the city and the HRA were looking at purchasing the Columbia Arena, the city loaned the HRA $1.5 million in order to do that. What this does, it amends a resolution that was adopted in 2014 that talks about payback, and instead offers a new resolution that really recognizes and offers an upfront payment by the HRA to the city in the amount of $1 million, and then identifies a payment plan for the $500,000 that would remain in that $1.5 million loan. So really what you're doing is you're amending a resolution, you're rescinding the first one and amending so that it recognizes this more modern and accurate way of payback between the HRA and the city. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you again, Mr. Hickok. Does the council have questions?
Mr. Mayor, on page 104, under section 4, the last sentence of that first paragraph under 401. How is that interest rate determined? Do you see where I'm reading, Scott? Under
Last sentence
section
in 4.01,
Yeah.
is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, the last sentence, how is that interest rate during that term, how's that determined?
Okay.
Do you see where, the last?
Yes, I am.
Okay, okay.
It has to do with the TIF formula in clause A and B. It references, and
Because it says less than, how does it become less than?
in effect, as
versus-
of that date, if it is less than 4%. It's basically saying that it shall not, expenditure shall not exceed 4% or greater of the rates specified under statute, and points you to a section of statute where there's an adjustment clause referencing paragraphs A and B. And honestly, I'd have to take a look back at those statutes to understand directly.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how they decide whether it's because it's 4% up in section 2, then how does it, said shall be determined as of each January 1st using the maximum rate under clause A and B.
Dan, I'm not certain if you're able to help me with this.
We got an
Yeah,
answer
so-
over here.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the
So we can-
council. So just to clarify,
Okay.
Section 2 and Section 4 are actually referencing two different loans. The loan referenced in Section 2 is actually the loan between the HRA and the city, and the loans referenced in Section 4 are the loans that the HRA is making internally to finance the payback to the city of the $500,000. Essentially, what's happening is the original resolution proposed to refund the monies owed to the city directly from the TIF district. Since that repayment was proposed to happen over a 25-year period, it created some pretty complex reporting requirements with the Office of the State Auditor. And so, given the financial position that the HRA is currently in, they actually opted to repay the city from their general fund and then advance themselves the money internally from the TIF district to avoid some reporting requirements. So it's a little bit complex on the HRA side, but Section 2 is the loan from the city to the HRA. Section 4 is the loan that the HRA is handling internally to finance its own operations and payback. The interest rate that's referenced in Section 4 is a maximum. There are some state statutes that control interest rates that can be charged on TIF loans, and so this resolution just reflects those statutory authorities.
So when it references A and B, are we still talking about 2.01 or not? That's the part that's confusing to my brain.
When you say A and B under 4.01.
It said, well, the last sentence of that paragraph in section 4.01 shall be determined using the maximum rate under clause A or B. So
No.
what's clause A and B?
Yep, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, so.
Oh, it's under state statute and,
Yep, A and B.
okay. I get it now.
Referencing
Thank
those
you.
statutes. And then the interest rate is just for those TIF loans that are happening internal to the HRA. It does not affect the loan repayment between the HRA and the city.
Okay, well, I'm glad you explained the whole thing about this HRA paying themselves back, and, because that, I don't know that that's clear, if I understood that before you said that in this section. And then on page 105, so Board of Commissioners on page 105 under 4.06, Board of Commissioners is the HRA, are they considered the commissioners there? 'Cause
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yes, that's correct.
Okay, because where would I understand that if I was someone else reading this?
So Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the resolution that Councilmember Bolcom is referencing is actually the HRA resolution that was adopted at their most recent meeting and is attached as reference material to the resolution that's being presented this evening to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Reynolds?
Pam Reynolds, 1241 Norton. When I read this item, I wondered in my head, if they pay back the 1.5 million, then do they own the dirt under this building again? Just like the old building? Or Or how did the city, I thought the 1.5 took care of us, the city, owning
No, we
this
borrowed the
piece
money
of
to
dirt.
the HRA. And now they're paying us back.
Okay, but how did we buy this piece
Well,
of
my
property?
understanding is, and I'll let the staff bring it up, is that city doesn't own property, so, yeah, the HRA is our investment.
Your Honor, before we pass it off to the staff, I just wanted to say that when the city council authorized the 1.5 million to the HRA to work in partnership to acquire the land that was owned by the Columbia Arena site, this building and its complexes were not in any plans or visions. So they needed the money to do redevelopment, and the HRA came to the city council and requested that. And then we loaned that money to the HRA under specific terms, which we're asking the HRA has asked us to revise those terms, rescind an old resolution, and get most of the money up front now, and then take the rest of it, $500,000, over some time. So I just want to make sure that we understand that it wasn't planned out, that we had a site all planned out and buildings and all that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, we never even, the city council never invested in this land with the idea that there would be a city hall here. So as things got developed here, as a plan started to develop, then the amount of property that would be needed for various development started to take place. And also, the city, the old city hall, that dirt is owned by the city, and that was already being addressed here in the previous city council meetings to transfer that property to the HRA so they could redevelop. And I'll turn it over to my staff who would want to add some further clarification on the specifics.
I just want to say I'm fully aware of the fact that when the money was loaned, this was not in the plans. I already knew that. But I thought that there was an agreement that when you decided to build here, that was your share of building here. And now they're going to pay it back so that they own. Here we go.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Jacob, let's get a response. from Mr.
Members of the
Jacob.
council, it was always intended that the HRA would pay back the city. This was too good of opportunity, the Columbia Arena site, for the city to pass, and it was, as Wally aptly described, Mr. Weisopel aptly described, this site was purchased and later developed as a civic campus. And you might recall, if you watched some of the other then subsequent council actions, and of course, council, you were involved with those, there was some transfer of land. There were plats done. There was a tax increment district that was created. There was platting that was done. Of course, the tax exempt parcels that the civic campus is on aren't in the district, so those were taken out. We have now a number of parcels that are being developed that are HRA-owned parcels, and the city does have in its ownership the parcel underneath the city hall and underneath the Public Works building. Those aren't in the TIF district. Those were conveyed to the city, and HRA parcels are those that are being developed, where the patio homes and the townhomes soon will be evident.
Okay, thank you. I thought that I understood all the platting but I thought the conveyance that 1.5 was tied to that. So we do own the dirt under the building.
Okay, thanks.
Good.
Thanks for the clarification. Okay, is there any other discussion?
Mr. Mayor, if it's so in order, I move a resolution amending resolution number 2014-54 and rescinding resolution number 2014-92, which approved interfund loans associated with the proposed Columbia Arena redevelopment project, accepting HRA's repayment of a city loan and authorizing expenditures found on pages 101 and 102, and include the HRA's resolution number 2018-14, found on pages 103 through 106.
Second?
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any final discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? And the motion carries. Which leads us to informal status reports. Does the council, staff have anything to report to the audience?
My understanding was the Coats for Kids was very well there was 60, I talked to Mr. Workey, and he said that there were 65 families served with warm coats, jackets, mittens, hats, and so a great turnout. So, I mean, and I guess what I'm trying to say is I want to thank everyone that did donate either new or used winter clothing for kids.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Staff have anything to report?
If nothing further, I would move that we adjourn.
Second?
We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, the motion carries. Thank you for attending or watching your city council. Good evening.